Good evening, everyone. This is Laura Lee Solomon coming to you with Charting Your Course. Andrew Bartzies, Kathy Ma, and Debbie Smart are all working frantically to prepare for the upcoming event in Oregon, Living the Mystical Life Daily. And there's also a Galactic historian team member who has been hospitalized up there very recently. And she's quite ill and may face surgery soon. So things are being complicated, and complications have to be worked through in the best way possible. And the best way possible at the moment was for Andrew to say, we're going to take care of this, and we're going to do what we need to do here. And you, Laura Lee, are on the spot for charting your course. Last time I was on the spot for charting your course, I tried to give an overview of the Western occult tradition in 2 hours flat. I wasn't real satisfied with the results, but I had about 15 minutes to prepare for it, so I suppose if I could string a coherent sentence together, I did okay. That being said, I was working on an idea for the show, which I do intend to go forward with, but I'm always shown something I need to deal with in the course of my preparations for the core of what I'm doing on the air. And this works with my own show, and it's worked here too. Last evening, we were given a link to a YouTube video done by Mr. John Rasmus. John is a friend of a young man named Brandon Young. And John likes to look into the things that have everybody tied in knots. And he does some serious analytical research in a scholarly way. And that just doesn't mean footnotes. That means kind of a Sherlock Holmes ability to investigate things as well. And he investigates. And he produced a video on the human sacrifice that took place at CERN. And I was pretty pleased with it because, he expresses his findings and his conclusions from it all very informally and conversationally, and it's a nice video. He does a lot of work like that. Check him out on YouTube. His name is John John Rasmus, Razimus. Well, sure enough, as soon as I had posted this link, well, not very long after, I had someone come up and write, this guy's summation would be more believable if this was not such a secure site. The video was taken from one of the most secure buildings on the property. The people at CERN do deal with the occult, which is shown in their bizarre video Symmetry, which is full of symbolism. The short video poses some, and she put her own video up. So obviously we are dealing with someone who has an addiction to fear porn. And she's got it entrained in her consciousness that there are all these horrible things and people in the world, and we have to be afraid. And so do you. And, I wrote 3 paragraphs. She makes me feel like her mother. I want to take her toy skeleton collection away and throw them in the trash. And I'd advise her to learn some symbolism rather than putting up a sign of the cross and saying there's symbolism in there. That's evil. Because let me tell you, the language of the unconscious mind, the Jungian unconscious, everybody's got one. The language it thinks in is symbol. As Jung himself found out, Carl Gustav Jung, when he was about 38 years old. He'd been doing this rational stuff with psychiatry, and then one day the doors of his undermind opened and all this stuff was welling up. And he thought he was going insane. But all this stuff was symbolic content. And he did a book in private and in detail. He wrote it out in handwriting of a very ancient manuscript type of German. And he duplicated the imagery in intricate detail. And you can spend a couple of $100 and obtain a copy of his book now, long after his death and long after his family finally got it out of the vault, in the bank vault where they had stored it. That's the Red Book. There are marvelous things in the unconscious mind, and Jung is very clear that that episode, which lasted for a couple of years and which he diligently recorded and made notes about, and in his private hours courted its emergence so that he could observe it, it was the basis of all his subsequent work. So, even if that had been a real ritual at CERN, even if someone was sacrificed and gutted there on the altar in front of the statue of Shiva, whom everybody equates with the devil because they don't know any better, your best defense against the effects of any such ritual is a fearless, centered coherence on the universal identity, the universal one, the cosmic life, God, if you will. People are averse to the word God these days. God is sort of something that the powers that be made up to control folks in a lot of people's minds. But the cosmic life force is an aware, conscious, thinking presence, and it flows through all creation at once. And it maintains a dynamic, unified balance as it moves. So everything moves with it. As Ram Dass's old book said, the only dance there is. And that one dancer is Shiva Nataraj, the Lord of the Dance. That is how the Hindus depict to themselves that one life in its dynamic balance and universal scope. It is a divine entity. And in the form of that divine entity, using the form that they have contrived across the ages, you could do a worship and communicate with the essentially a very potent tulpa, which is the Shiva Nataraj figure. That's what the God forms are. They're repositories of enormous psychic energy. Well, there was a situation a few years ago where devout Hindus were finding that statues of the god Ganesha, the elephant god, were drinking milk. And Ganesha is said to be the son of Shiva, at least in one of the strands of mythological Hindu belief. He's the son of Shiva, and the statue was drinking milk. Actually, Ganesha is the breaker of obstacles. And he is also an entity that in all depictions, it clearly is fond of knowledge and books. And he's always shown with them stacked up around him, just like a Kabbalist. And that was why a friend of mine, Becky Borman, who has for many years been the public relations officer for the McAllen Public Library, and I myself actually got together and did a Wiccan ceremony invoking Ganesha when our wonderful little town was going to give the library away to a local junior college, which was going to devour it and pretty shortly forget McAllen. And if McAllen wanted a public library, they were going to have to start over, just like Brownsville did. And we invoked Ganesha and turned the problem over to him. Today, McAllen has an award-winning library that is a reconstructed, recycled, abandoned Walmart, and it is one of the architectural award winners for the state of Texas in terms of libraries that are artsy and efficient and wonderful. And it's a beautiful building, and it's got a lot of books. And I personally credit Ganesha with that, who didn't seem to care that it wasn't a Hindu puja. It was a ritual that we contrived along the outlines of the Wiccan tradition, which Becky practices and I had read about. We got good results. We got excellent results. But we didn't get results by being afraid. You get results by being centered and aligned with a power higher than yourself. How do you do that? Well, it's all a matter of living the mystical life daily. But the mystical life as I practice it is different than Andrew's approach, which is very shamanic in its nature. Because I came up in the tradition of builders of the Adytum. The Adytum, well, the Builders of the Adytum is an organization founded by Paul Foster Case back in the 1920s, still extant, still teaching. And Paul Foster Case was once the head of the Order of the Golden Dawn in the United States, until they kicked him out for making eyes with his girlfriend during a ritual. Because after all, it was Moyna Mathers who was in charge of things then, and she couldn't handle that, so off with their heads. But he persevered, and he wrote some books for a school he started, and then ultimately developed Builders of the Adytum. What is an adytum, for God's sake? An adytum is the part of the structure of a classical temple where the living presence of the god is said to reside, the god to which the temple is dedicated. Now, in you and me, as temples of the living God, we have an adytum within us, a place where the living God is seated. And in the Vedic tradition, that is in the heart. The energetic structure of the heart is the most energetic center in the body, and it seems to be that center which coordinates the intelligence of the body and coordinates the body with other bodies in the environment, establishing a state of coherence that enables masses of people to act as one for higher purposes, not like a mob, but for higher purposes based on love. Just as coherence makes light waves flow together and produces laser light that is coherent light, so does the heart cause coherence. And the heart will never become coherent as long as you are afraid of stuff and married to fearful ideas of things that are the dark powers who are overcoming us. You don't have to worry about the dark powers. They'll take care of themselves. You worry about manifesting that power to which you wish to become coherent. The cosmic life, or, frankly, God. Now, God at that level is formless. God is understood by the Kabbalist is a power that is all pervasive and all powerful, and moves everything that is moved through his whirling dance throughout creation. But that beginning of the whirlings that is the beginning of everything in the Kabbalistic system is personified as a form of God, the Shiva Nataraj, at a lower level where things have form. A much lower level, actually, because we come from the actual level of creation and ideas into actual creation of form down at the third level of creation out of four. So God forms are closer to us. But what I wanted to talk about was the 7 stages of spiritual unfoldment. And it's important to talk about that because everybody needs to know that spiritual unfoldment is a science that's pretty much understood. It's been understood in the Hermetic tradition for a long time. And I have provided in several places in Facebook an image of the tarot tableau which shows the 7 stages of spiritual unfoldment, and a link to one of Paul Case's older books. One of the ones he wrote originally that was republished by an order called the Society of the Inner Light. That group was founded by a student of Paul Case's successor in Builders of the Atom, Ann Davies. The successor is Paul Clark. But bear in mind that they are speaking the same tradition, and the Inner Light group publishes Paul Case's original stuff, not the stuff he polished for many years and presented as the correspondence lessons in Builders of the Atom's curriculum that lasts some 14 to 20 years, depending how long it takes you to assimilate them. I've been a member since 1986, and I've assimilated quite a bit, but I'm still only working on the Meditational Ascent course. That one is about, I'd say 12 to 14 years in. And I've been in far longer than that. So anyway, we work with what we have. And we take it as fast as we can. But in the image of the tarot tableau, which is present in the large scale in the book I have linked, because I'm one of these people whose radio shows always have a book linked to them, and there may be even 2 or 3 books at any given time. So I'm actually doing that to you here on Charting Your Course today. And there's a book. You don't have to really open it yet, except about halfway through it, there's a glorious large-scale full-color illustration of the Tree of Life, and a little further on about page 156, as you're looking at the PDF file in Adobe Acrobat Reader, 158, there is a full-scale tarot tableau in color as well. So it's kind of a treat for the eyes in that respect. There are 7 columns on this arrangement, and there are 4 rows. The very topmost row is occupied by one of the major trumps of tarot alone, K0, the Fool. And it is very aptly placed there, even as it was placed back in the 1920s when Paul Case was originally writing, because 0 represents the 0-point field. It represents the basic drive to manifestation that caused the universe to come into being. And the tarot key, the Fool, shows this as a consciousness, a human-formed consciousness, a young actually androgynous figure, striding along the mountain peaks in little yellow shoes of light. And he is clad in rich velvet, embroidered with 10 circles that are 8-rayed stars. And these circles represent the whirling electromagnetic force that brings everything into manifestation. And the black robe represents the principle of limitation, which is balanced against that outflowing light at the top of the tree of life that provides structure for that light. So he embodies force and form going forth, driven by the power behind him, which is shown as a white sun in the sky. Sephira Kether on the tree of life. And the figure bears in his hand a white rose. The rose is always symbolic of desire, and the white rose of pure desire. That is, he has one pure desire, and that is self-expression via manifestation. And as he walks along, his next step is always going to be off the edge of a cliff. And the nature of his being light, he falls down into the abyss of manifestation and is at the top and is at the bottom simultaneously, represented by his reflection and companion, a little white dog. In the BOTA version, unlike the weight deck, the dog is friendly. I mean, we're looking at the image of God, G-O-D, and it is reflected in dog, D-O-G, literally. The little dog dances alongside as the companion of the one intelligence. One of these exquisitely trained small dogs. And the figure has over his shoulder a stave, which is a unit of measure, implying measurement and analysis, and slung on the back of that stave is a red pouch. And inside the red pouch is the entire implicate order of cosmic creation, all folded up into a little pouch, carried along lightly, almost like a souvenir. But the implicate order of physics is the order that is intended. So what we are looking at is intention. And the pouch is colored red, which means will. So the one will, the intention, is this information will be unfolded into manifestation and express the entire universe through the being of this one life. And that 0 card enfolds all the other cards of the trumps major of the tarot. And it's therefore in the first row all by itself. Beyond the first row, we've got 3 others. And on these rows, we are looking at row 1 is keys 1 through 7, and the second row is keys 8 through 14, and the third row is keys 15 through 21. So the rest of them all lay out in 3 rows of 7. And each one of the columns in this array represents a stage of spiritual unfoldment. That first row of 7 cards is all about the principles on which manifestation is based. And the middle row of cards, 8 to 14, is all about the regular, orderly processes by which manifestation happens. These are the agencies or laws by which the principles operate. And the third row on the tarot tableau are the resulting conditions or phenomena that are predominant at each one of the stages of spiritual unfoldment that we're going to talk about today. The conditions and phenomena of the first stage of unfoldment is depicted by the symbolism of the 15th key. And most people who have not looked at tarot before, and quite a few of those who have looked at tarot before, see that key 15, which is the devil. And they back off right away. They don't want to have anything to do with tarot. But what is the devil? The devil represents ignorance. As simply as the Hindu tradition would have it, the only sin is ignorance. Andrew is working with his friends up in Oregon, where he lives, getting ready for his event, Living the Mystical Life Daily. He's got on his website free video series of the same title, showing you some tools and giving you knowledge about how to have mystical experiences, an active part of your life. Sign up for free at andrewbartzies.com. Enter your name and email for access to the 2 free videos and further information about the event about to take place at the 3rd and 4th of September in Seattle. And also, while you're contemplating that, please send your thoughts and prayers for that team member who is hospitalized at present. It's a very serious situation, so keep her in mind. And with that, back to the subject at hand. The first stage of spiritual unfoldment is called the state of bondage for a reason. It is a state of imperfect expression of the objective consciousness, the principle represented by the magician. The magician is the card at the top of that first column. And the title of that key, the Kabbalistic name for the path it's assigned to actually on the Tree of Life, is the intelligence of transparency. The working self-consciousness is like a light guide that channels, that acts as a conduit, like a pipe or an empty flute, channeling the powers of the above to the below without distortion. These powers are applied, however, by means of key 8. Key 8 is strength, and the figure you see in key 8 is the bright-haired woman of tarot. She shows up as Mother Nature, primarily, and she is actually the governing power of every aspect of nature and the natural order. She is that manifest beingness whose boundary is the universe. And everything within it is within her. So she is the governing agency in all the expressed life below the level of self-conscious awareness. And as the one life moves through the universe and begins to manifest and build form, it eventually creates self-conscious entities. And these have a lot of potential because they can observe nature. And in doing so, they can figure it out. And they can get their mitts on the controls and start to become active, co-creative agencies with the Most High. But until that happens, we have to deal with the way we have been treating Mother Nature. And the way we treat Mother Nature is the way we treat our own subconscious minds. It's sort of like a toxic waste site. Everything we don't want to think about, everything we do want to think about but is horrible to contemplate, all of our traumatic experiences, for our entire record of existence, because she is the Akasha, and within her being are written the Akashic records of all the worlds. All of it is in there, and most of it is dropped into the depths of her being where we don't access that stuff. So in a lot of ways, we manage it like a toxic waste site, and we get all these areas in the subconscious, our personal subconscious, where we attach to the Mother Divine, that are like fenced in sites where these, signs that say keep out, and a guard dog on the inside screaming if anything comes near. And really, it's a dire situation. But it is the work of the self-conscious awareness to classify and arrange sense experience, to observe accurately and to correct the misapprehensions of the subconscious and put everything in good order. In terms of that branch of the work called alchemy, it's called the great work. The magician channels the Most High to the subconscious awareness, which accepts his conclusions without any critical judgment whatsoever. Critical judgment is the job of self-conscious awareness. And that critical thinking faculty has to build the house of theory or generalization from the observation of many particulars in experience, so that inevitably in the results there is some limitation of the powers of man. No sooner are the generalizations accepted, accepted and ratified by the objective consciousness as being true, then they are delivered over to the subconscious, which takes them and uncritically applies them to its work of formation. So really, much of what you see around you is based on the patterns stored in the subconscious mind. If you want to clear up your manifestation, to bring it into coherence with the divine intention, you have to clean up your act in terms of what you think and how you look at things. You have to be willing to look at things in detail and look into them and see what's going on, because sometimes it is simply force applied to require further development of you. The wise invariably recommend, Paul Case writes, the reading of sacred books as a preparation for unfolding the latent powers of spirit. And what he wishes us to observe in this connection is that such reading is an exercise of the objective mind. These books are part of the memory of nature, a physical, materialized expression of that memory, to be sure, but just as much a part of it as the Akashic records we hear so much about. These books contain generalizations from experience that we all need to learn, and the sum total of their teaching is the doctrine that the life power is a limitless unity which uses personal centers as vehicles for self-expression. This is the doctrine implied in the symbolism of the magician, and from the time you are able to accept that doctrine, from the time it begins to act as a suggestion to the subjective, subconscious mind, it will eventually sprout and grow and liberate you from every form of bondage. Mere acceptance of the doctrine, though, is not enough. You have to practice by holding the mental attitude that it implies, that you are a conscious center of expression for the primal will to good, the primal will to express through manifestation At the heart of creation, the idea of beauty. So, you must identify yourself mentally with the magician and every day take time to remember who and what you really are. A center of expression for the primal will to good, from the first thing in the morning to the last thing at night. And really, what this does is it straightens up cause and effect. The cause is our thinking and our understanding of the way things work. Causes are never external. Effects are never internal. Nothing that is outside can change your inner life, no matter how much you may seem to be affected by what happens, by what people say or do, by stellar influences, or by anything else in your environment. All these things modify your vehicles, your physical and etheric bodies, but those bodies are just as much a part of your environment as the houses and the trees and the tables and the chairs. And so long as you impute to externals a power they do not really possess, your subjective mind will accept that as a suggestion, and it will exercise its control over all your vital functions to make your personality play the part of the bond slave of circumstance. Reverse the suggestion and you reverse its consequences. Watch your mental processes and you will see that your personal expression of the universal, objective mode of consciousness is at all times absolutely the controlling principle. The subjective mind cannot help but carry out the instructions formulated by the objective mind. See yourself as the magician. Realize that your objective mind is the architect of your house of life. Practice thinking of yourself as the center of expression for the primal will to good, to which all things and conditions are subject. Remind yourself again and again that your personality is the instrument of that limitless life power, which works through you to manifest a particular demonstration of its power to produce beautiful results. You have race memories to overcome. You have your own past errors to rectify, yet all these will yield to persistent practice, to the constant dropping day by day of ideas formulated by objective consciousness into the fertile soil of the objective mind. Look at Key 8. Look at her. She's got a garden of flowers on top of her head, just like the garden of flowers at the magician's feet. It's the same garden. So practice and keep on practicing living the mystical life daily, because an error is always a half-truth. You don't have to get rid of your errors. What you have to do is to take the truth that is in them and complete your realization of it. This is the true inner meaning of the teaching, that one is to overcome evil with good, and this one is biblical. It is the beginning of the way to freedom, but it is the state of bondage, that first level of our awakening. The second column is about the awakening. It's rather fierce looking. At the top is Key 2, which is the subconscious, the pure subconscious mind, sitting there as the high priestess, and in her lap is a scroll. All of the information in the field from throughout the universe. That scroll, the book of life, is the Akashic records, and she is the first matter, the primal substance, the nature of the subconscious being. So, in looking at her, you need to see the whole column. We're looking at the high priestess, the hermit with a star in his lantern, standing on a mountaintop, an icy mountaintop, looking down from the darkness. But casting out the light from his lantern to all of creation. And in application, that is all about the tower struck by lightning. I need to tell you about this one because it's quite a ride. The experience we're talking about has for its active principle that phase of universal consciousness represented by the high priestess, the Mother Divine. And I want to say that Paramahansa Yogananda of the people who came from the East to teach the Vedantic tradition of yoga in the West was a great devotee of the Divine Mothers. And he said, when you pray to the Mother Divine, she will answer. For the Mother is closer than the Father. She will answer in her lightning voice. That's a direct quote from one of his tapes. So if you consider the tower struck by lightning, but the lightning is coming from the sun, golden sphere with rays, and that golden sphere with rays is in the lantern of the hermit, you can see the structure of this symbolism in tarot. The subconsciousness is in no way inferior to the self-consciousness. She is the equal of self-conscious awareness, but she represents the manifested aspect of creation, or transliminal consciousness, as one of the terms Case uses, which means across the threshold. And it symbolizes the mode of consciousness that Hindu philosophers call Prakriti, telling us that Prakriti and Purusha are coexistent, co-equal, and co-eternal. In this phase of consciousness, we can read the records of the past expressions of the life power. Psychologists have found out by experiment that the subjective mind seems to have a perfect memory, and that memory is in its very nature non-local. It is not centered in your brain. It is not centered in your flesh. It is everywhere. It is universal. And this is going to be one of the fundamentals enabling you to read the Akashic records, as Andrew hopes to teach you during his event coming up, Living the Mystical Life Daily. The scroll of the High Priestess symbolizes this cosmic memory to which all have access once they become aware of it. The two aspects of the life power are objective and subjective, magician and high priestess, and they're coexistent, but we're normally only aware of the self-consciousness. We don't generally have experiences like Carl Gustav Jung did, where the subconscious gets up and speaks, until we do. But when we do, we've reached a place in our personal manifestation, our personal bodybuilding activity, our observation of nature, and our spiritual practices that enable us to discover the essential unity of being behind the veil of manifold appearances. The title of the High Priestess in Kabbalah is the Uniting Intelligence. She is that quality of space-time that unites us all in an energetic field that is actually unmanifested at any given time. The majority of her being is not visible, but it is extremely powerful. We make the discovery of working with the field of the subjective mind by closely watching what happens in the plane of our daily existence that we contact through sensation. And from that plane, we get the facts which are utilized in the objective processes of inductive reasoning. And in our unfoldment, the more precise our observations, the more accurate our measurements, the better our intellectual perception of things as a premise or hypothesis, which we in turn hand over to the subjective, subconscious mind. This is how what we see as the input to the process. The objective mind then impresses the subjective with whatever premise of non-separateness the mental state can start to see. And we see it in synchronicities as things start to unfold occasionally. And as we catch the enthusiasm of that and start to get all excited about how it works, how we actually create what's around us, our bodies undergo some changes too. And they go through some clearing and adaptation. Some of the body cells don't adapt themselves easily to this new condition, and they die off and are eliminated from the body, and their places are taken by new cells, new wineskins to hold the wine of a new idea. And thus there's brought about a gradual change in the structure of the body until the moment arrives when there is a sufficient number of new cells to make possible a clear personal realization of the truth, a flash of perception like lightning. We'll be back. We're back, and we're back to talk about the consequences of invoking the lightning, which is what we really are doing when we're seeking to grasp the content of the subconscious mind, because the Divine Mother will answer, and her voice is like lightning. The person in whose body the changes are happening as new cells start to be built on the idea of the ideals of the uniting intelligence is going on for weeks, months, maybe even years, while all these invisible, imperceptible changes in cell structure are being accomplished. The person in whose body these changes are happening has no inkling of what is going on, but all at once there comes a sudden flash of direct perception, which seems to upset his whole house of life. A sudden, catastrophic glimpse of reality, such as is pictured in the 16th key of the tarot, the Tower. It's called the exciting intelligence. Sometimes this experience is so vivid, it temporarily paralyzes one or more of the person's faculties. Saul of Tarsus was struck dumb by it on the road to Damascus. Another may be blinded. Even when the effects are not so marked, there is a forcible tearing apart of the structure of personal consciousness, which can often make the person passing through this experience feel that he is going insane. Carl Gustav Jung would agree. I would too, because it was quite a ride. As sudden as the experience is, however, it is the culmination of an orderly series of mental and physical changes, and it comes to nobody who is not prepared to stand the shock. This is why Andrew is sounding that cautionary note. He's going to teach people the techniques of accessing the Akashic record. But he knows that you have to step over that threshold and into being a connected part of the universe in order to do that. And establishing that connection can be a challenge. You have to build for that. Just as a lightning flash may give a traveler a brief but clear picture of the road he's on and destroys whatever false notions he may have formed of it while stumbling around in the dark, the darkness is banished to a degree from that point forward, and you become necessarily a developing seed of unity consciousness within the context of our physical manifestation. This is the beginning of the process that will see you become what In the Hindu tradition, one hopes the Brahmins are the twice born. Going through a ritual does not make you a twice born. Going through this experience is the beginning of it. It is your first initiation. And your acquaintance with the lightning will become ever more joyous. But at first, you do wonder. You do wonder, why me? I certainly did. And I wasn't the sanest person afterwards either. But I will tell you something. I had for months a grin on my face that I could not wipe away. It was like being illuminated. In a sense, it really was. It reminds me of one of those old training tapes that I used to show students while I was an instructor in the Air Force. I was an electronics technical instructor, and we were talking about electronic safety and using one hand to connect things in circuits, not both. And they had a little lamp and a little clown that was also a lamp, and they connected them up and put them into the circuit. And the narrator said, now the lamp and the clown are both lit. I was lit like that. So I understand people having opinions based on experiences that are fearful. But until this is overcome, you're not going to be able to build what needs to be built by all of us to graduate from this particular life experience into something a little broader. Miss, I am a poor mortal surrounded by millions of other mortals who are all potential enemies, and by natural conditions that are even more inimical, and by elites that want to kill us all. To suddenly realize this is all a lie, and to suddenly see that one is an immortal, to suddenly perceive all other human beings and all the conditions of personal existence as working together to bring about the perfect realization of a cosmic plan, this is kind of devastating to what you may think of as sanity at the moment. But it is the outworking of the inmost reality of one's own being. It is a reversal of personal and race consciousness, and at first, it temporarily knocks one flat. This experience is not an acquisition. It is not something that comes to you from the outside. It is not a miracle. It is there because you are a center of expression for the objective consciousness of the life power whose one desire is self-expression through manifestation. There simply comes a time in the evolution of your personality when the premise of the unity of being is formulated in your objective mind, and that premise becomes the starting point of a series of subjective operations which build you the body that can give expression to the life power's self-knowledge. And this is why I wanted to shake that girl, who is probably a woman my own age, and take her toys of fear away from her and break her adrenaline addiction and tell her it's not real. I will probably just wind up having pissed her off. Because this flash of inspiration is really a participation in the life power's perfect recollection of itself, and the difference between the after and the before is enormous. And people are entitled to their limitations. They really are. But you can't go back once you've done this. So the lightning flash of key 16 must be understood to be a ray of light from the hermit's lantern. And what my experience was that this golden amber beam of sunlight came in through the top of my head and flowed through my being, all the way down to the basest, ugliest aspect of manifestation that I generally managed. And it loved and accepted all of it. All of it. And I wasn't on drugs. I was listening to Enya and singing along and blessing everyone in traffic as I was headed to work that morning. I was on my way to my job as a technical writer at Rose Electronics, which is where my Air Force career had eventually led me. And I was sober as a judge, except for the Enya music and getting into it emotionally, because emotion is the starter for this. And I'd been doing this for months. I'd been working there for nearly a year by that time, at least 9 months. And it was working, by the way, for an Ekist. And Eckankar is one of the traditions that is actually, I'm an affiliate of Eckankar. And their work is very, very similar to the Western occult tradition, but they put it in the format of the traditional light and sound meditation schools of India. So it is an outgrowth of that is manifest here in the West. Nevertheless, what I am telling you about the stages of spiritual unfoldment is applicable across all traditions. And it supports and sustains what is there in Eckankar as well, because they tell you in the Ek lessons, if you take them, that the stuff you get externally is very nice, and it's kind of indicative, and it's people's stories and experiences basically, but it is all taught from within. It's the same thing in the Western occult tradition, except we're a little bit more detailed about the instruction. And we can tell you what the places are that are a bit of a wild ride. I want you to understand that the moment of awakening is not something that is readily undone, short of a radical change in, no, you really can't undo it, because the memory of nature is perfect. There's no going back once you cross that threshold. But we have to consider, too, the middle key, the agency of that, the astrological attributions of key 9. Key 9 is associated with the Hebrew letter Yod, which means a hand. And it is as if you had the attention of the Almighty God, and He reaches out and puts His hand upon you and through you. It's like petting a cat. Every part of you responds to that, and your vibratory rate changes. The zodiacal sign associated with this key is Virgo, and the part of the body ruled by it is your gut. Now, if you've been following Andrew for a long time, you will know that one of the things he recommends most ardently is detoxification, and colon cleansing is a big part of that. It's a big part of the process of doing a detoxification, and it all happens through the medium of your gut. Also, in the Hindu tradition of Ayurveda, which is very closely related to alchemy, the assimilation of the vital essences of sunlight from your food takes place in the small intestine. So that in the practice of personal alchemy, if you are breathing in the prana and your gut is absorbing the prana of sunlight from your food, then you have the upward pointing triangle from your gut and the downward pointing triangle from the air. The symbolism of their unity comes together in your being, and the unity consciousness is the result. But if you've been through this stage of unfoldment, you know It becomes an experience. It's not a theory anymore. You've been shown. And it's one of the most amazing experiences of the early part of the spiritual path, leaving us to develop it. Because one of the things you will think is, if there was a way I could make that state of consciousness come back to me, I would do anything. And one of the big stumbling blocks to people who have gone through this state of consciousness is the entire movement involving the entheogens, the drug culture of cultivating spiritual awareness by drugs. You can get a temporary flash from drugs, undeniably, but it's temporary and it leaves you dependent on some external agency. It is not the real deal. So if you get caught up in something like Burning Man, which is the heart and soul of the entheogen movement, and that becomes your culture and your watchword and the way you want to go, you are in fact not developing this. You are trying to stifle it and bury it in outward manifestations of stuff till you look to drugs for things. This experience cannot be gained that way. What we need to do instead is go for stage 3. Stage 3 of the unfoldment of spiritual awareness. You need to understand that you really do have all these faculties within you to start with. They're just undeveloped. And the moment of unity awareness is that moment when you realize that you want more. You want more one way or another. The hidden potencies become manifest abilities, and the vague impressions one takes in become definite mental images that are crafted by you for a reason. It's all an elaboration on what you're actually doing in the state of bondage when you're manifesting all the spiritual awareness of Iraq. But as you have stepped through the threshold, you realize there's more. And that more is cultivated in the state of revelation. Paul Case writes, after the stress and shock of the sudden awakening to the fundamental error of separateness, after the lightning flash of true knowledge has toppled the crown off the tower of common sense, as shown in the symbolism of the 16th major trump, there comes a period of calm and gradual growth. The lightning flash is over. In the second stage, there was this sudden and painful overthrow of the false wisdom of the world, a momentary but never to be forgotten glimpse of reality, of the absolute unity of life. In the third stage, this new concept of the oneness of all begins to gradually unfold. And what happens and the specific activities involved, we may discover from looking at the 17th key of the tarot and the column that it's in, which is the Empress, the Wheel of Fortune, and the Star. The Empress, the Wheel of Fortune, and the Star as key 17. Key 17 is assigned to the Hebrew letter Tzadi, which means a fish hook. That's its literal meaning in Hebrew as a word. Hey Tzadi, the fish hook. It is the letter to which the meditation is assigned in the Sefer Yetzirah, which is the Kabbalistic scheme of the paths on the Tree of Life. This is the 28th path, joining the Sephira Netzach to Sephira Yesod. And astrologically, this letter corresponds to the sign of Aquarius. Aquarius is ruled by the planet Saturn, which is the 21st key of the tarot. And implications of Saturn are limitation. But in the function of key 17, we're going to be limiting something. And what we're going to be limiting is the image-making faculty of the mind. The way consciousness works is you've got a constant stream of imagery. And that constant stream of imagery is something that if you sit down and try to meditate, and you're doing the Hindu version, which you're trying to still the mind, the monkey mind it's called, you can stop the chatter, but you're left with a steady stream of imagery. And what we do in Kabbalistic meditation is actually a prolonged concentration. Concentration is the quality symbolized in key 1. Only we're going to prolong it and we're going to limit it. It's limited to a field of investigation. There's something you particularly want to think about. And it's just like baiting a fish hook. This thing you want to think about is the bait. And what happens in this particular stage is that you perceive some challenge or difficulty or some situation, and you want to see your way through it. You want to understand what it's about and what goes into it and what is expected of it. You want to look at all the details. And so you sit down in meditation and you think about this one thing. Now your mind will tend to wander off, and it will tend to wander off so much that Paul Case in his early writings had students of the Kabbalah building for themselves, actually get your own beads and string the thing together, a mala of 108 beads. And this mala was to count the deviations from that one thought that you want to think about. And he fully expects people at the beginning of their practice to go several times around the mala with every break in their concentration as their mind veers off into other things. But eventually you learn to slow down the stream of imagery and hold on to the thing you want to think about it. And you hold it in your mind kind of like a puzzle, like a Rubik's Cube, and you're turning it over in your mind and contemplating this one thing. I need to know more about this. And it's just like the process of fishing, only you're sitting on the bank of the unconscious, the sea of the unconscious that is universal in scope and contains the Akashic records. And you're looking at your situation, your issue, your problem in the context of fishing. That is, this is the bait for the ideas and associations that will arise from the unconscious. And this is where your Kabbalistic or magical or mystical journal needs to be open and ready to go, because when the stream of thoughts starts, as it arises from the subconscious, you have caught your fish. And you need to start taking notes as to what is involved, what you are getting in connection with the idea that you've been presenting to the unconscious, the subconscious. See, the fundamental assumption of the ancient wisdom is that every center of the life power is related to the whole of the life power. The many expressions of the one is conscious of all, the one power is conscious of all the details of its expression in the many. And in its perfect knowledge, past, present, and future, it is united. It knows the whole of its self-expression as a whole and in detail. Our personal consciousness is but a specialization of this cosmic consciousness. And since the life power is omnipresent and omnipotent, it is perfectly free and there is nothing whatever to prevent its communication to one of its personal centers of any detail of knowledge that it possesses. Paramahansa Yogananda used to use this a lot. This particular assumption is the working hypothesis for your work in the third stage as a meditator. And you're tapping into the vastnesses of the cosmic consciousness and the subconsciousness and asking for information. And you will receive information. You know, another master teacher who used this a lot was the Master Jesus, who would say, "Of myself I can do nothing," and saying, too, "All that the Father hath is mine." Because you're starting to accept the notion that you are a child of the universe and you have a right to be here. And whether or not it is clear to you, the universe is unfolding as it should, and you can learn about that. So, Paul Case was very specific in that his writings of the lessons that he put out was not his personal effort, but the same kind of effort. Of himself, he did nothing. And he relates the whole practice of this stage of revelation, this stage of the third stage of spiritual unfoldment called revelation, to an idea that is expressed in a work called Light on the Path. Light on the Path was written down, as she puts it, by Mabel Collins when she was an active member of the Theosophical Society. And the chapter that she wrote, particularly the second chapter of this work, is about the aftermath of the lightning flash. And she writes, "Out of the silence that is peace, a resonant voice shall arise, and this voice will say, 'It is not well. Thou hast reaped, now thou must sow.' And knowing this voice to be the silence itself, thou wilt obey. Thou who art now a disciple, able to stand, able to hear, able to see, able to speak, who has conquered desire and attained to self-knowledge, who has seen thy soul in its bloom and recognized it, and has heard the voice of the silence. Go thou to the hall of learning and read what is written there for thee." And she continues, "Stand aside in the coming battle, and though thou fightest, be not thou the warrior. Look for the warrior and let him fight in thee. Take his orders for battle and obey them. Obey him not as though he were a obey him not as though he were a general, but as though he were thyself, and his spoken words were the utterance of thy secret desires. For he is thyself, yet infinitely wiser and stronger than thyself. Look for him, else in the fever and the hurry of the fight thou mayest pass him, and he will not know thee unless thou knowest him. If thy cry meet his listening ear, then he will fight in thee and fill the dull void within. And if this is so, then canst thou go through the fight cool and unwearied, standing aside and letting him battle for thee. Then it will be impossible for thee to strike one blow amiss." We'll be back. We're back. And being back, we want to talk about what goes on in meditation, because what we're cultivating here is our connection with the sovereign self and the guidance of the sovereign self, as the quote from Light on the Path might make clear. So, to return to the connection between Tazadi, the fish hook, and what goes on in meditation, the inner consciousness of the subjective mind is often compared to a sea and the various forms of knowledge to fishes swimming in it. When we select some particular object for concentration and fix our attention upon it, we are baiting a hook and dropping it into this sea of the subjective mind. And as fish are attracted by the bait, so are various forms of knowledge having an affinity to the object of concentration, attracted to our mental fish hook. When meditating, some detail of the symbolism that you perceive will be emphasized in your consciousness, and a glimpse of the meaning below the surface will come to you. And this is the time to land your fish, that is, to make notes of what you have glimpsed just as soon as they are definite enough to put into words. And then cast your hook again and watch until another thought form takes the bait. Remember always to maintain the mood of expectancy. Your subconscious mind is like a bay opening into the ocean of cosmic consciousness, and thought forms from the furthest reaches of the great sea will be drawn to you by meditation. This is not theory, my friends. It is a plain statement of what has been experienced by many people, myself included. The life power knows just what everything means and has the perfect memory of every thought that has ever been given form in any mind of any human being. There is no such thing as a secret or as a lost art. Nothing is hidden, said Jesus, that shall not be revealed. The words are sober truth without the slightest tinge of exaggeration. And in the shamanic tradition, one of my teachers, who actually has, his name is Tom Brown Jr. And Tom Brown Jr. has a school of the primitive skills. And Tom Brown's school has some shamanic courses in it. And he tells the story about how he, in a state of doing a vision quest, was addressed by the spirit of a native woman. And she led him on through the veil into the land of the dead, and brought him to someone who wanted to teach something. What she wanted to teach him was a pattern of basketry that was an Apache water basket. There were known to be 5 different patterns for the water baskets that the Apache used to carry water. They were actually watertight, and there are only 4 of them that are known today. The 5th one was missing. She taught him how to do the 5th one. So there are no lost arts. Tom Brown Jr.'s Tracker School is something that you might pay some attention to if you are more interested in the shamanic tradition. But Andrew's gonna take you guys on a ride in early September. So I certainly want you to go there and do that first. In any case, your subconscious responds to your mood of expectancy. So if you are sitting there expecting a response, the mood of expectancy will contribute to the likelihood of response. Remember, mood is an emotion. So emotion and ideation are always working together. And this is something that is true when you start to do ritual as well. You have to bring emotion and image together in your ritual. And the physical actions simply bring the emotion and the imagery to ground them into the earth for manifestation purposes. And the practice of meditation eventually brings one into conscious connection with the life force at all times. In the Hebrew alphabet, the word fish is associated with the letter Nun. And to this letter, the Sefer Yetzirah assigns the zodiacal sign of Scorpio. And this zodiacal sign rules that part of the body corresponding to Yesod on the tree of life, the reproductive centers. And as the fish hook draws the fish out of the water to be eaten, so the right practice of meditation lifts up the nerve force in the body without concentrating on centers, because that can throw things into imbalance. But by just the process of meditation, elevates the nerve force, which energizes the organs ruled by Scorpio and converts that energy into food for the growth of the spiritual man. And as this growth takes place, one becomes aware of the ever-present divine guidance that is always there for each of us. It's just a matter of becoming aware of it and receptive to it. But, and Paul K. specifically states this in his writings, this is why continence and chastity are insisted upon in all the old books on spiritual development, the old books. These requirements, however, are often exaggerated and overemphasized. They who suppose that celibacy is necessary to right meditation are sadly in error, says the man who got kicked out of the Golden Dawn for making eyes with his girlfriend during a ritual. And he was right. On the contrary, the celibate life, because it is a life of repression, is a hindrance to spiritual unfoldment. You have to be able to love. The Bible contains accounts of men who ripened into higher consciousness who were also fathers of large families. In these days, too, there are men and women of illumination who are by no means celibate. Clean living and control are indispensable. Control, however, implies right use, not repression. Until seekers for the light come into the possession of right knowledge of the true functions of sex, there will continue to be more or less those following after false doctrines. And this is not a place to elaborate on them, he writes, but those who are ready for more light will find it if they fix in their mind these 2 points. The sex function has other uses than reproduction, and its misuse consists of employing it for mere sense pleasure. The third stage of unfoldment, although it makes use of and modifies the nerve force which is ordinarily employed in the sex function, has nothing to do with that function itself. Right meditation releases and lifts up the serpent power, the kundalini stored in the nerve center at the base of the spine, which is called the Muladhara chakra in yoga philosophy and is known to modern physiologists as the sacral plexus. In meditation, the force stored in this ganglion is made to rise so that it energizes in succession the 6 other centers, of which 4 are in the trunk and 2 in the head. These 7 centers are symbolized in the 17th key of the tarot by 8 pointed white stars surrounding the great yellow star in the center of the key. This indicates that the true source of the force which is modified in meditation is a cosmic energy, the stellar light or the astral light of Eliphas Levi, when he describes in terms that have enabled us to identify it as the prana of Hinduism and the ruach of Hindu scriptures. It is self-conscious awareness. Remember this always. In this work you are doing, you are not trying to control some power which is your personal possession. You are simply learning how to obey certain laws of handling universal energy, which is none other than the limitless light from which all things proceed. Because the primary activity of this light is the whirling motion concentrated in Kether at the very root of the tree of life, because it is rooted in the unmanifest. And it is represented in the 17th key by an 8-rayed star. These rays are like the 8 spokes of the wheel of fortune. The wheel of fortune. We're not really trying to lift ourselves up by our own bootstraps. There is a cosmic process at work. And that cosmic process is a flow of energy from the highest down into the abyss of manifestation through the lowest forms of manifestation. First the rock, then the plant, then the animal, and then the man. And beyond the man, the spiritualized human being, which is something even beyond the general run of man. And that is what we're trying to do. And the nature of this work is to cultivate that channel, which is a true work of divine grace. It is the perfect self-gift of the one life to all its personal aspects in manifestation. In the Ekankar tradition, we have a lady who has written a book. Her name is Anne Archer Butcher, and her book is Inner Guidance. And she talks about in detail some of her experiences of the inner guidance that she received starting as a school teacher, and how it brought her onto the path as it manifests in the tradition of Ekankar. Now, her experiences are mind-blowing, but this is what happens when you begin and persist in the work of establishing this connection with the self-conscious awareness of the one life. It starts to keep you informed. Now, in the tradition of Ekankar, that stream is called the Mahanta. And the timing and the information of the Mahanta have been found to be impeccable. And they personify it as their living Ekmaster, who has a dual title. It's the Mahanta, the living Ekmaster. But I will say that he is working too as a personal representation of that power. And his ability to let it express through him in an unobstructed way is impressive, simply because of some of the stories people tell. But it's all about the inward way. So at the beginning, the practice of meditation is a concentration upon things of the external world and facts reported through the senses, but it is the beginning of the establishment of a continual state of connection and awareness that manifests fully in the 7th stage of spiritual unfoldment. And with this experience comes a new understanding of what is meant by Mother Nature, or the feminine aspect of the life power. This is why all 3 cards of the tarot in this particular stage relate to and emphasize aspects of the feminine. The 3rd and the 17th keys, the central figure is a woman, and the same woman, in fact. The 10th key, the title of the card, points to the working of the same feminine power. For this wheel of fortune, Fortuna is a goddess whom the Greeks call Panthea, or she in whom all the feminine aspects of deity were synthesized. She it is who makes meditation possible, for she is the uniting intelligence. And all throughout this lesson, on the 3rd phase of spiritual unfoldment, it is to be understood that it is not we who meditate, but the life power which through us manifests its ability to meditate, and we cultivate our coherence with that. And that ability is the work of the universal subjective feminine mode of consciousness. All we have to do is get our personal selves and our personal thinking out of the way. For the experience of the 2nd stage of unfoldment, the swift, sharp flash of real perception, it's called the exciting intelligence because it sets up the subjective response that takes form as meditation. And in that moment, the spiritual man is conceived in the womb of Prakriti. The 3rd and 4th stages of unfoldment correspond in many ways to the processes of physical gestation and birth. And we'll get into more of that when we start to look at the fourth stage, not to be omitted. The fourth stage is organization. It is the organization of your body, the organization of your life, and the organization of your consciousness. But the tarot keys involved in that, key 4, the constituting intelligence, the Emperor, Justice, which is in fact that feminine figure again, all about balance, and not only balance, but elimination where necessary. She's got a sword in her hand. And finally, the Moon, which is the process of evolution. On the spiritual path, we're still working with the process of spiritual evolution, but we're not taking the ages of long, slow unfoldment that are consigned to those mills of God that grind exceeding fine. We are reaching for the controls and starting to become conscious users and workers in the system. We use the system to enhance our personal lives, but the enhancement of our personal lives enhances all life, and it gives us the capacity to reach out and extend our abundance to others. That's what it's about. So when we get into the fourth stage, we are looking at a level of organization that is a gradual unfolding, but it's very much related to the function of sight, because sight is the function attributed to the Emperor, and with him the letter He, which carries the Hebrew idea of a window. The whole idea of it being He, to which the Emperor corresponds, has this esoteric meaning that sight is not only the physical faculty and its psychic counterpart, the power to visualize or imagine, but this is also the important aspect of the discriminative faculty, to decide what is bullshit and what isn't for yourself. And this faculty of discrimination is a development that is necessary on the spiritual path, because it is loaded with all sorts of stuff and all sorts of entities who want to tell you things. So it's important to cultivate that sense of not of personal importance, but of the overall divine function that you are trying to connect with, and not to let something tell you, you're the mighty high person and you've got to have this mission, and we're sending you out to do X or Y or Z, and everyone in the world will think you're insane. And we're not after that. We're not really depending on spirit guides at all, because you're gradually becoming centered in the sovereign self. And as such, you start to see clearly and arrange what you see based on your experience, which become like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, and you see the bigger picture and how things relate to each other and how they fit in. And this tells you something about whatever it is you're considering. Ideas and facts fit together, but only if you're looking at them attentively. And error and ignorance, as well as truth and wisdom, have distinguishing marks, which cannot be hidden from him who has vision. Generally, error and ignorance are the hallmarks of the fear-generating stuff. If you're looking at something and they're telling you this you need to be afraid of, it's something that is just trash. And consider as much of it as such then. You want this clear seeing that is guided from within, and it is not supernatural or miraculous. It's a connection that you have built with the constituting intelligence that defines and delineates everything. So long as we believe in personal action, so long are we deluded by the illusion of separateness. And thus, we become unable to make use of this interior wisdom. But it is there. And when we've passed through the third stage of unfoldment, the light begins to shine through us. We have identified our mental activities as being, in reality, specialized operations of the universal intelligence. And we see that the life power's knowledge of every detail of its manifestation must be always available to us. So, the sight center of your being is the back of the head. And the back of the head is what the key labeled the moon is about. And the moon is about the evolutionary path, both the natural evolutionary path and the accelerated evolutionary path, as is symbolized by the wolf, the natural evolutionary path, and the dog, which is the result of somebody taking conscious thought and choosing various lineages of dogs to bring out certain specific traits. So it's a natural process still, but it is an accelerated process towards specific ends guided from within. And as you become more ripe in the spirit, in spiritual development, as you become more mature, you need to remember that each aspect of the universal consciousness, as it's represented on the tree of life, is now at this very moment a part of your mental equipment. And God willing, we'll see you next time with the rest of these 7, which get heavy